The stack is growing. These are all new or spare hives waiting to be used that will be used next year. Just having a big tidy up because I am going to be doing a lot of organisation this winter, and it looks like there's a new project on the table which I'm really excited about, which you'll all be part of in the near future. But last night I was lucky enough to be asked to do a presentation for beekeepers in Ireland for Three Rivers Beekeepers Association, and they asked me what could I do, and I said, well, I'm actually just working on one called Amateur to Professional, which I hadn't finished writing when I agreed to do it. So last night was the first time I presented it. I really enjoyed doing it, and it really makes you kind of appreciate the journey you've taken and how you've got this far to come to this point. So it's kind of a bit humbling as well for me, but really well received. I really enjoyed doing it, and I got a lot of great comments. So I hope you enjoy it. Here it is. Bye for now. All right, this is a stupid question. Yeah. But you are actually in Ireland, aren't you? Even though it's the northwest corner.
Yes.
You're just over the border, aren't you?
Yes, we are actually. We're physically in the south of Ireland, but we cover the south and the north.
Yeah.
So okay. We have members from Northern Ireland, and we have members from County Donegal, which is the south of Ireland.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Yeah. So that's where we're based. That's why we're kind of cross border. And what else could you say? Yeah, we're affiliated to the Ulster Beekeepers in Northern Ireland, since they are closer to us.
Yeah.
So welcome to everybody that's online here at the minute. It's lovely to see. There's a good few faces and names that I'm not familiar with, so it's lovely to see and meet people that are new. So you're all very, very welcome. And a special welcome tonight to our guest speaker, Richard Noel, who is coming to us tonight all the way from Brittany in northern France. And he's going to give us a presentation on his work as commercial beekeeper and the work that he does in France. So it's lovely to get another angle and perspective on beekeeping from a professional. All right, so it's over to you, Richard.
Well, thank you very much, Connell, for that introduction. It's really nice and a privilege to be talking to everyone where you are. I looked up, I did a little bit of a Google search, and I had a look, and I did have to ask Connell whether you're in Ireland or Northern Ireland, and obviously you are actually in Ireland. But it was interesting just for me to see the geography, because I do find this fascinating, but I don't have enough time to learn all my geography. But bear with me anyway. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully we can open this presentation. Right, can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Right, let's just make a proper, let's get to the start, and I should have this open already. I'm just trying to get this to run because my menu is in the top, and bear with me a sec. I can't press play on it. There we go. Right. So tonight's presentation is all about how I progressed from an amateur beekeeper to a professional. I'm not saying I'm a true professional, because I've only been doing it 2 years, because I'm growing like everybody else. So I'm trying to be as professional as possible, but I have to be, because it is now my only source of income. I did landscape gardening when I moved to France in 2002. I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a moment. But I then started keeping bees in, I think, 2009, and I'll show you all that as well. But I've only actually been a technically professional beekeeper since January 2000, for the last 3 years. And then I've only been just keeping bees for the last, and getting all my income from that only source of bees for the last year. And unfortunately, as you might have heard before, I picked the worst year to make the start, because it's been the worst year for the honey crop we've ever had. in the last 32 years. So this will kind of give you a cross-section of what I've done, and I hope you enjoy it because there's some great pictures in it, and write down all your questions or post them to the wall as I progress, and I'm happy to answer them all. I don't know if I've got all the answers, but this is what I do, and this is what I really love doing. So first of all, a bit about me. Then I'm going to do an overview of my current operation, kind of just some pictures of what I do, how I do it, the spring, summer nectar flows, which I'm sure are very similar to yours. And then I'm going to try and show you my transition from amateur to professional and put into that my thoughts and experiences. So all about me, I'm 50 years old, born and grew up in Jersey, Channel Islands, not far from me, just over the water. I went to Hadlow College in Kent in the UK and studied horticulture there because I didn't have a clue what I was going to do when I left school, and that seemed a really good idea. And it kind of paid off in many ways afterwards. When I did my qualification, I then came back. I worked in Jersey as a nurseryman in plant nursery for a couple of years, and then I joined the States to Jersey Ambulance Service. So I completely changed my track, as many people do. And then after working there for quite a few years, I then moved to France in 2002, and I've been here ever since. So it's going to be 20 years next year. So initially I worked as a landscape gardener because I had the bit of paper that said I had the qualifications, and that's what it has to be in France. You have to register and be legally claiming you're a landscape gardener. And I was actually then pluriactive, so I did more than one job. We had a gîte, we rented that out, and a gîte, if you don't know, is a holiday let. So I'm working under the term as pluriactive, but it means having more strings to one bow. And then I got my first 3 hives in 2009, and I became a professional beekeeper in 2019 in January. That's really more fiscally, but it just got to a point then where I was said, right, I need to make sure that I can declare this as a professional beekeeper. So I finally gave up my other jobs in September 2020, that's September last year, obviously. And the reason why that happened was because I'd had a really good year on my bees. I'd got a lot of apiaries up and running, and we'd had a pretty good honey crop that year. And also because of Brexit, a lot of my clients had sold up. I won't say just because of Brexit, because I'm not going to wave that flag and say it's all a problem. But a lot of the clients I had were all English, and they were either from Jersey or from the UK. And through what I call natural wastage over the previous 5-6 years, they'd all kind of disappeared, and I just had grown my beekeeping. So it was what I manifested, is what I wanted to happen, but it finally happened. So currently I have 200 production hives, approximately. There's probably a few more than that now. And I have about 100 nucleus colonies, probably a few more than that as well. They're all scattered around, but I made extra nucleus colonies this year because we had such a poor summer crop. I had to kind of dig my heels in and go, right, what am I going to do? Let's put everything we can. Let's seize this opportunity and spend a bit of time making some more nukes. And that's what I did at the end of the season. And I also have about 40 mini plus colonies, but they're just overwintering. They are nothing special, just queens that I will build up next spring and then split them all down and make more mini plus colonies to give me queens for next year. That's what we use the mini plus for. It's just a queen rearing machine, but we use the mini plus because they're very flexible. So this is where I live. I'm lucky I live in an amazing part of the world. Brittany is very rural. A lot of old stone cottages. Obviously, they don't build them like this anymore. So, but it's a fantastic house. It was fully renovated before we bought it in 2002. And it's fantastic when you get this. It's lovely and cozy in the winter. We do get a bit of snow every now and again. We had some last year. We had a lot in, I think, 2010 as well. We had about a foot of it, which lasted a week. So it depends. If we get weather from the east, like a lot of you in the UK or in Ireland, you will get, when you get that cold blast, the beast from the east, we get it as well. But we are generally mostly influenced by the English Channel. We get beautiful things like this. You know, that's just a nice picture that you take in the heat of the moment, and then 2 days later it's a soggy mess. But that is living near the sea for you. This is the hamlet I live in. I'm actually under that blue spot, and the hamlet is called Tréguier. That's how the French pronounce it. It's not very big. There's about 20 houses here, and we are surrounded by a really nice valley. And we get all these little kind of valleys all over Brittany. And that's the kind of countryside you get. You get fields that have got nice hedgerows, and most of the hedgerows are still intact. There's been no legal allowance of people to rip them up over here. There was a little bit a few years, well, maybe 40 years ago, but now what's left has to stay. So some of it is protected. So it's great. They're legally, and things now they're changing. They're planting a lot of extra hedgerows in, and that's being encouraged, which is great. So there's my local town. This is right outside our kind of like mairie, we call it, but like the mayor's office. It's a Roman Gallo town, and it's well known for its ruins. You can visit all that, and there's a small museum. But that's just a little bit about Corcel, where I am. This is where I'm actually based. Under that pin is where Corcel is, and this is roughly where my apiaries are. So I have 14 apiaries at the moment. I might be up to 15 if I overwinter a lot of my nukes. And I hate selling nukes because I know they're worth more to me as bees the following spring than they are to me as money, but needs must. If you have to sell some to create cash, you do. So that's the kind of the same area you just saw. This is my nearest town. We're actually just here. There's my hamlet again. Gives you some idea, but that is roughly where my bees are. They're in these hamlets, and you can see all these little valleys, and we get a really nice rural place to put apiaries. So you get really good spring and summer pollens, and you get a wide variety of pollens. But we get just two main nectar flows, the spring, which I'm sure is very similar to your spring, and we get the summer one, which is majority chestnut and bramble. We're situated near small villages, so you do get little pockets of more diverse pollens. When we get our summer dearths between middle to end of July and September before the ivy starts, you get, thankfully, a little bit of pollen from the odd shrub here and there that people buy and put in their gardens and that. So it's a great place to keep bees, to be honest. But you have to keep the numbers of colonies in your apiaries down. You can't have 20 or 30 colonies. You've got to have between 16 to 20 as a maximum. Otherwise, the bees lack forage in the dearths. So that's to give you an idea where we are. Obviously, you guys aren't on this map, but you can all work out where I am. We're pretty close to St. Milo, actually. So I was on about diversity of pollens. I love to show this picture because this picture was taken from the bottom of my garden. And at the bottom of my garden, there was a huge 5 hectares of rapeseed oil, or canola. You might call it in Europe. I don't know what you know it as. We know it as rape. And you can see the rape in the pollen, but you can also see a huge amount of other different types of pollen. So even when the bees have a complete banquet on their doorstep, they go and get other stuff as well, because they kind of know that there's good stuff in the other pollens. And that's what we are really excited about, because we know that it gives diversity in their diet, in their food. And when you raise queens, you want to see this. It's great. You're not feeding them the same food all the time. So a quick look at our spring and summer flowers. We get early mimosa sometimes. This comes out the end of February, if we're lucky. If it's not blasting, howling, southwesterly winds, and the bees can fly. Occasionally we get a year where the bees can fly on this, and there's several huge, well, probably 10 mimosa trees around my apiaries, and the bees just come in with absolutely buckets and buckets of pollen, but really early in the year. And if you get that, you have to be on your toes, because you know that those bees are going to ramp it up because they've got that bolus of pollen. And then we have the blackthorn, which I'm sure you guys have, Prunus spinosa. And we seem to have 2 flowerings of that, a kind of early one and a later one, as well as everything else that flowers at that time of year. And we get the cherries, and we get the domestic cherries. I'm sure you get all of that. And then we get this. As I said, we get canola. Masses and masses of it. They seem to be able to keep growing it here. The flea beetle that has decimated crops in the UK doesn't seem to be so prevalent here, but they also are doing something else where they sow 2 types of canola, and the first one to flower, they actually spray off, and it has an earlier flowering one, and that's when they control a lot of the flea beetle for the following year and keep the numbers down. But they also are now incorporating manures into the surface. You might have seen this to stop the flea beetle eating the young shoots of the brassicas. Obviously, they're all brassica plants, and the flea beetle loves hot, dry weather, and it decimates the plant when it's not growing. But if we do often get nice weather in Brittany, but with some humidity. And then as soon as the plants get away, they're fine. It's just that critical period. But they seem to do it every year. And we are never, every apiary, well, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever you think about it, it's a massive amount of flowers that the bees bring a lot of honey in. So it's a good crop for us. But it does probably cause swarming. It gives us headaches, but we'd rather have it than not have it. So this picture is hawthorn, and in the middle, this picture is of a Prunus pedis or bird cherry. And I love to show this picture as well, because this is the end of my nectar flow. When the hawthorn comes, it's usually for us about the last week of April, first week of May. As soon as the hawthorn finishes and the rape goes over, because the rape flowers in early March here now. It doesn't flower in April and May when it used to. It seems to flower earlier and earlier every year. I don't know whether that's climate change. I don't know whether it's breeding of canola or rapeseed, or whether they change the seed, but it finishes earlier and earlier. And we use this hawthorn now to know that when that hawthorn finishes, it's time to harvest your honey straight away, because as you know, it all crystallizes really quickly. And it's not just the canola or the rapeseed or the crystallizes really quickly. It's also the summer honey, also all the spring flowers like your hawthorn, like your apples and everything. They all seem to crystallize really quickly, but obviously some quicker than others. So as I've said, spring honey very quick to crystallize, and some areas have more or less different percentages of different flowers in them. But you have to just work on an average when you become a professional, and you can't really hold off, because you've got so much to process. This is the worst time of year for us. We are doing our headless chicken thing here. So if you're lucky and you get a little bit of time before you harvest and you get a lot of build up, you can make some early nukes, and you seem to get really good mating, because there's a lot of young drones just been born and they're nicely mature, and we sometimes manage to pull this off. So you imagine that, how lovely is that? You make a new apiary and it's all full of new stock for the year, and that should give you a summer crop of honey. So then we have June gap. But the June gap isn't a June gap. It's actually mid-May to mid-June. But we still have some pollen coming in. You know, there's all sorts of flowers still in flower. There's the late garden plants and things like that. And because there's gardens around here, you tend to get a lot of that. Ceanothus, stuff like that. And but there's not much nectar, as I say, because it just stops. So the nectar just virtually stops. So you have to feed if you're doing cell building. You have to stimulate the colonies if you can, if you need to. But they've already got enough food in them as well. And we are obviously making splits if we can do, if the colonies need it, if we can get away with it. We are getting colonies ready for the main summer flow, because they might well have swarmed. It happens. Our main weapon against swarming is giving the bees space. And in the spring, before the flow starts, we go into the colonies and we take out probably 2 or 3 frames of honey that is overwintered, and every year, and this coming spring, it's going to be worse because we had so much fantastic ivy. We're not moaning because we use all those frames later in the year, but it's a lot of work because you've got to get through all your colonies quickly, because the nectar flow just goes bang and it starts. And before you know it, the bees are running out of space, and you've got to keep that space. And that's how we generally manage our swarming. So we are, as I said, headless chicken. It's probably the busiest time of the beekeeping year, because we're trying to harvest honey, we're trying to make first queens, and we're trying to make splits, and we're trying to get the colonies stop and swarming, and trying to extract honey. It's just a complete nightmare. But we know that once we're through those few weeks, it progresses then to a really busy time, but we're through that crisis point. So that's our summer chestnut honey. Lots of chestnut in flower and bramble. And this is our Dadant 10 frame hives. And to give you some idea, each one of those hives, each one of those supers will hold approximately 20 kilos of honey when it's full. I've got a picture of one coming up on the scales, and it says 28, 29 kilos, but the actual super weighs roughly about 7-8 kilos. So it's approximate. But we get some good honey crops in the summer. Bramble, we get obviously lots of that, and we get this beautiful chestnut. Now, the chestnut is the most abundant, probably anywhere in France. It's most abundant here. Absolutely loads of it. There's a little bee there you can see with its load of chestnut pollen on its corbicles. And those bees are working so hard for that summer period that they know that it's the last crop of the year, and they go hell for leather, and they work so hard. The colony starts to smell of chestnut. It absolutely kind of stinks. It's not unpleasant, but it's a very, very strong smell, and the bees almost go like a greeny yellow color when they're working it. So it's great to see, and that gives you some idea of the amount of chestnut trees they have. Every one of these trees is a chestnut tree. There's a few oaks in the middle, you can see that, but it's predominantly oaks and chestnut, with probably 70 to 80% chestnut. And some are just flowering here. This one there, I don't know if you can see my cursor, that is full flower. There's some here that haven't even started yet. So you get about a month of continuous flowering. So you can add supers for the first couple of weeks, and hopefully in the third and fourth week, they finish those supers off. That's the kind of apiary ready now for harvest. As I said, this was one of my first apiaries I did only up the road from me. I'm going to show you this in more detail, but obviously you need to have a way of extracting it. We have twin extractors I use at the workshop we got, and I'll explain how this all works, but it's a pretty simple process. But I put this picture in here just to obviously show you that we've got to extract honey, but the summer crop is much easier to extract because it doesn't crystallize. You've got really 2 or 3 months to get it out of the frames. These are the honey supers we use. I don't know if you've heard of the company Nico, but Nico make the queen rearing equipment. They also make these plastic frames. They're called Beekeepers. We like to be as environmentally friendly as possible, like everybody, and we use these frames because we believe they're actually good, because you can reuse them. Now, I'll explain. These are called Beekeepers, but they are semi-built when you buy them, and you put them in a super in a 10-frame configuration at the start. So if you count, there's 10 frames there. Now, once they've been built out, then you can change that configuration to 8. But you can see this is a full. See, that's what it looks like inside. It can be a little bit awkward to extract because sometimes our decapper doesn't decap all the wax well, because you're trying to put there most of those frames in that super. We convert them to an 8-frame box. So the next time they go on again, those are 8 supers in the 8 frames in the same super, but they're spaced more. So the workload, but increasing your honey capacity is to make sure your frames are built properly, and you can have less manual handling for the same amount of honey, if not more. In a box like this could be one of those boxes that weighs 28, 20. Frame of honey, that's what everyone likes to see. The end of the summer flow. If we're all like that, we'd be happy, but obviously they're never not. There's the weight I was telling you about. That's a 28-kilo one. The frames and the boxes are heavy. I know what British Nationals are like. I don't know what you mainly use in there, whether you use Langstroth, or we can maybe talk about that after. But for us, the Daedon frames work well, but you've just got to be careful when you handle them, because they're a lot of weight. When you're lifting 200 supers on and off in the truck, back to the workshop, it's all manual handling. You've got to make sure you mind your back. So there's some of the honey that you can buy on the French supermarket. If you look, you can see different producers. I'm not going to go into the debate whether it's EU or non-EU, because a lot of it is that, and I know it's on everyone's fingertips at the moment, because we only want our honey, we only want the local honey on the shelves, but people come in and buy the cheap stuff, and we all know where it's come from, and we all know that it's been imported, and we all know that there's a middleman somewhere just buying it up. I said I wasn't going to go into it, but there you go, just buying it up and put it out. It's their business, that's the problem we have. But we try and sell our honey as pure honey, and we know it's local. That's all I'm going to say. But there's a lot out there, just like there is everywhere else in the UK and in Ireland, I imagine. So this is where I would stop this part of the talk and talk about queen ring, but I'm not going to talk about queen ring, but I'm just going to say, to have all that honey, you need one thing, and that's prolific queens. And that's what I do now. I have better queens than I've ever had, but I have more work to do than I've ever had. But this is what I do. So we also have a mating station. I wanted just to show this to you as well, that like everybody, we have a place that's kind of central to many of our apiaries, and we kind of bring in the best stocks to near the apiary, and we augment the drones in our colonies 40 days before we think we're going to have virgin queens flying around that will need mating. So that's kind of what we aim for. But like everybody else, we just do the best we can. We can't control it because there's a lot of other people around with single hives that we would say are full of, you know, different strains of bees that are non-desirable to us. But that's just life. We just have to do the best we can. So here's how it all started for me. That was the first 2 hives I bought, were at the bottom of my garden, and you'll see a little story about that in a moment, because they're no longer at the bottom of my garden. In fact, there's an awful lot more at the bottom of my garden, but initially I had to move them out because my then wife got stung on the nose, and obviously I was having to move our hives the next day. But they're the first hives I bought. There's 3 hives there. The first 2 I bought, and I bought another one later in that year. And then I had obviously three hives for my first year. And I was obviously totally bowled over by that. I couldn't stop looking at them and see how nice and new they were, and they're all painted and oiled, and I had all the time to do that, and which I'd never have now. So first 3 Dadant hives at my home in 2009 containing bees that I bought. Now I have 200 production colonies and 40 mini plus and about 100 overwintering Dadant 6-frame Nukes, which I'll show you in a minute as well. And they're all made from my own bees. I maintain everything. I haven't bought any bees since I bought those first 3 colonies. It doesn't mean they're all from those 3 colonies. It just means I've split them, I've done things, I've manipulated them like us beekeepers do to make the stock I have now. So amateur to professional, this is my journey. There's me on the left-hand side with my first harvest. There's me with a mini plus frame in the center photo. I'm not sure which is your left and right, but I think on the right, that's me with a nice load of queen cells. I don't usually do pictures of queen cells like this because I like to get them in the incubator. This was a really warm day before someone asked. It's not good to handle them really, but sometimes you just like to go for the picture, you know. So there we are. This is the journey. Classification. First of all, I wanted to classify beekeepers so you're all clear. There's 3 main groups. You have the amateur beekeeper, and this surprised me because of the terminology, but when I looked it up, it's people who work or own just a few hives. Their main interest is an attraction to ecology and natural science. Honey typically is a byproduct of this activity. And then you have the sideline or the part-time or semi-professional beekeeper. And they are people who have a high number of colonies in an attempt to make profit. They have other activities, so they do not rely on one source of income. And then you have the professional beekeeper, often referred to as a bee farmer or a commercial beekeeper, and is someone who relies solely on beekeeping for their income. It is their only activity, and their size of operation can vary from 250 hives to as many as 6,000 or more. I mean, if you follow some of the American beekeepers, the number of hives they have is mind-blowing. They've obviously got a lot of staff. Someone like me, I work on my own at the moment, and I would hope to run about 250 hives if I'm going to stay on my own for now. But if you are on your own, you need a minimum of between 200 and 250 to have any chance of making a living. So the amateur beekeeper, using resources from wherever you can. A lot of you can identify with this. You might put out some bait, some swarm traps. This is one I put out and the swarm didn't go in, but it landed on the front of the swarm trap. Okay, I call them swarm traps. Other people call them bait hives. You might get asked to remove a swarm from a window or something, or in a chimney, or if you can get to it. But up here was where the comb was. I managed to cut out the comb, but well, I removed the comb because the comb was so soft and shook it all into this box. And miraculously, all the bees, you can see them just walk down the wall. And I was this kind of knight in shining armor because I've never done this before, but it worked perfectly. And I wish it would always like that, but that cost me a whole evening just to get those bees in that box. I wouldn't have the time to do that now. And we used to do cutouts. So you get an established nest in a wall or in a in a bird box or whatever it is, and you remove the frames. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. It's what we have to do. So that's one of the way you get your bees generally if you're an amateur. You might buy a nuke. You might do that as well. I totally understand that. A lot of people just kind of catch swarms though. So this is me in my amateur days. These are the first nukes I made in my garden. They're all Dadant 5-frame nukes made out of ply, 16mm ply. And this is one of the swarm calls I got called to, and it was a lovely one to do. A nice low one, first floor window, very nice bees, all into the box, easy peasy. And here's me extracting that honey. This is at a garage of a beekeeper who was the man of the year, or the beekeeper of the moment, if you know what I mean. He was the only guy that everybody knew, and I'll tell you all about him in a minute. But he had swarm traps, and he used to have people around to teach beekeeping to, and he let me very kindly extract my honey because I was so keen, and I never shut up when I was there, a bit like now. He let me extract his honey, and I learned a huge amount from him. So the amateur beekeeper, some basic facts. Don't take any of this the wrong way. It's just an observations. Generally, most amateur beekeepers have between 1 and 10 hives in most cases. Okay, you collect swarms as and when they become available because you have time. You have more time to look after the few colonies. And I'm going on about time here because it's such a big thing when you become a professional beekeeper. You might have time to have treatment or non-treatment methodology in the way you work. I'm not going to say any more about that because it's obviously a hot potato and everyone has their own point of view. Has little or no resources, you're not really able to raise queens in most cases. So I'm not meaning you've got nothing, but I mean you haven't got spare resources, okay? That's just the way it is. Has to rely on catching swarms, artificial swarms, and walk-away splits to make nukes in most cases, or make queens, okay? You don't have those resources, as I said. And what I'm getting at here is you've got to use the genetics you have, really. You can select the best colonies to do this with, but you can't bring anything new in when you're limited in resources because you don't have that pool of other bees to choose from. In most cases, you're affiliated to a club or a beekeepers group and may be happy to buy nukes or queens to replace swarmed colonies, which is what we supply quite a few nukes to amateur beekeepers every year. So before we look at the transition from amateur to professional, let's ask why you would want to become a professional. So you may have already had good success with your bees. You might just have done really well for a couple of years. You like the lifestyle, it suits you. You like the fact that you can be out all the time, every day, working in the open air, doing your thing. That's one of the things I love about it. Beekeeping comes easily to you. Now I say all these things, but they're actually very important when you look at them. You have enough stock to carry you through the first year. I've actually made a mistake here. It's the first year stroke worst case scenario for the next season. Or so you think. What is enough? You have another source of income if things don't work out. Always a plan B. That's a very safe bet. Not many people have that luxury. And you have the support of your family or partner. This makes a huge difference. Because when you're under pressure and you're out late one night making nukes or harvesting honey, you don't want to have that pressure of what time you're coming home. You kind of have to, you almost have to forget your family when you're a professional beekeeper between March and October. You don't really have time. If you're going to make anything of this, you have to forget all those things. You have to work all the time. Taking 2 days off in the middle of the summer is a nightmare. It really is. You just have to keep going the whole time. You have a beekeeping family. You're just becoming a major part of it. So you may have done this as a bit of a sideline because you wanted to do something else, but your family were running a business, and then you now become a big part of it, which I see quite often happen in people I know in the UK. So the professional beekeeper, making all your bees from your own bees, producing your own queens, nukes and honey in a planned, timely fashion. Production hives. Here they're me honey and they're giving me some pollen as well. I have pollen traps on them, another source of revenue. Queens, not very well marked, but it's marked, she can still fly, okay? Making your own queens. Nuke boxes, this was one of my apiaries at the end of the season this year. Not all were queen right, but probably about 85% were. So I was very happy with that, even though we had a duff year. So that's what I do. The professional beekeeper should have a professional mentor or friend, colleague of the same number of hives, of the same level. It's great because you need someone to bounce questions off. Even when you're a professional, we don't know it all. We need that security. We need that, what's the word? We need to be able to speak to them and ask, you know. We've all got different ways of doing things, and that's the problem. And you need to have worked for another professional beekeeper or have experience at that level. You need to have an organized work structure. You need to follow proven techniques. This is the real world now. You're not just trying something because you think you can do it better because you've heard of a way. You can't afford to put anything on the line. You've got to make queens by the book, by a way you know works. You cannot risk losing all those queens, all those splits that you've just made from colonies that would have given you something else if you hadn't taken the bees from. This is like the real world. This has to be done properly. You've got to know the exact nectar flows in your area, when, where, and for how long. And that is what will get you honey in the hive. It's local knowledge. You need to produce your own queens, bees, and nukes. Now, this is a bit kind of open for discussion. Some people as a professional beekeeper, they might just raise queens and have no honey, but usually people that raise queens have to have honey because you can't do it without having some honey. You've got to give the bees space by means of a super, honey super, otherwise the bees swarm. But generally, you will produce queens and nukes, and some people might do insemination instead and just produce a few bees that are much higher quality. What I'm saying is, it is a bit variable, but most people produce queens, bees, and nukes because it fits well. You need a workshop that is and an extraction room fit for purpose. That's why I just briefly skimmed over that before that picture of our honey extraction unit, because I will talk about that more in a moment. You need to follow hygienic standards and know your pest and disease control. So there's a few more to go through here. You need to know how to handle large quantities of honey, building in a manual handling system. Okay, you're dealing with a 300 kilo barrel of honey. You've got to know how to move it. You've got to have equipment to move it safely. It's no good saying, oh, just chuck in the barrel, it'll be fine. You've got to know that that is a huge amount of weight in a small area, and it will crush your feet if it lands on you, for example. All these things have to be built into your operation. Okay, you need to implement an integrated pest management system, and you learn about that as you grow with your bees. But you need to not just say, well, I'm not going to treat this year, and that's the end of it. You need to know that, for example, if you're not going to treat, you've got to do mite washes. You've got to find out how many mites you've got. You just got to know what you're doing. You can't ignore the mite issue when you're a professional, because it will kill your operation. Right, you've got to keep up to date with and accurate records of what you do and when, for two reasons. One, a lot of the authorities who monitor and see what you do for tax purposes want to know what you've been doing and when, so they can just browse through and go, yep, I see, that's fine. But also, this helps you for the following year. If you write down when you made splits, if you write down when you put queens in, it gives you a record of what you've done and when. So it's a good thing to do. Just write everything down if you can find time. You need to learn a basic marketing strategy when you're selling your honey. You need to build on that and expand. It might just come to you. It might just work out well that you started selling to a local shop, then 2 or 3 more shops stop wanting to take your honey. That's fine, but you've got to decide what you want to do. So products from the hive, you've got to know how to you've got to know how to produce and process all these products well and in a timely fashion and at the right time that you get that chance to do it. Okay, it's just the skill. It's a craft you're learning. Don't forget, and you've got to have all this as a knowledge before you really launch yourself into it. Because if you don't, you're wasting opportunities. You've got to keep up to date with the latest technical releases and courses. Keep your nose in what's going on. Find out what Randy Oliver said about the latest information on Varroa. Keep that going. Look, follow people on YouTube who do that kind of stuff. It's free, most of it, and if you don't keep on top of it, you're missing out. Be prepared to share your knowledge and help other beekeepers and the general public. Remember, you are ambassadors of beekeeping, and you were once an amateur. There you go. Be an ambassador of your craft. Support all other beekeepers. So this is my transition. How do you go from your first harvest and a small amount of honey to a few nukes in your shed? With that shed, by the way, is where I made all my nukes and did all my work for the first 3 or 4 years. How do you do that before you go to this? Before you have beautiful nucleus colonies that are overwintering in 6-frame Dadant hives, before you have a nice line of mini plus mating nukes that are full of honey at the end of the year to overwinter, that you saw me in this apiary just before by chance. And how do you get production hives that are giving you honey and pollen, and then we'll go on to give you a split and a second crop? How do you do this? It's basically a numbers game, and that's what you have to start playing when you become a professional beekeeper. You need a lot of equipment, a lot of stuff. So what do you need? You need a good workshop with lots of dry storage, and you cannot do this at home anymore. You might think you can, but it physically is not possible. You need to have a place where you can put gear down and come back to it. You need somewhere to make repairs, make new equipment and make frames. I'm quite specific in this because there's a long list of things you have to do, and people don't realize what is entailed in a professional beekeeper because it's enormous. We don't, obviously we just all sit around in the summer while the bees are working, drinking red wine in France. It's wonderful. I really wish it was true, but sadly it isn't. A place to make ready nucleus boxes for the summer. You have to take the boxes apart, clean them, restock them, reframe them, do any repairs, put all the gear in, so when you grab that box, it's ready to go to the apiary. That takes a bit of time, and you need somewhere to store those boxes. You need a good, reliable supplier of equipment at reasonable rates. Remember, you're buying in 50s and 100s now. You're not buying 10 or 20, you can negotiate. What do you need? We're going to just continue with that. You need storage, for example, for honey-filled supers in the spring. Honey-filled brood frames in the spring. As I said before, I yanked out about 3 from each colony this spring, and I'm sure it'll be more next spring. But they all take room you need to put them in a bee-proof room, and you've got to store them there for 2 or 3 months. You need an area for drying wood, so you can buy some planks of wood and you can machine them down when the moisture's gone, and you can make your roofs, and then you can paint them up afterwards. But that needs space. You can see the wood on the floor there. That's wood, that's planks we buy to make roofs for Mini Plus. You need an area for your extraction, storing of supers before and after extraction, because if you leave them out somewhere, the bees will get to them, and they will get to them. They will find anything, because usually when you're extracting is when the dearth starts. It must be bee-proof. Your packing house must be to spec, because you're going to get inspected once you start selling honey commercially, in most cases. Okay, you may get away with it. You may just have a good clean area and they're happy with that, because you're probably selling in bulk in that case. But if you're putting honey into pots, you've got to adhere to individual regulations wherever you are. So you will have honey now, and you need a place to sell your honey at a good price. Remember, every drop is your profit. Okay, you do not want to give anyone your honey for free. Do you go bulk or do you do retail? A lot of people do both. I'm starting to sell in retail, but only just because I've traditionally sold in bulk because the prices have been good. Over here, a barrel of honey that's 300 kilos will get you as a bulk price. If you've got a good customer who buys regularly from you, they will probably give you about, I get 750 a kilo for summer honey. So that's a good price, you know. If it works for you, that's fine. But I don't like doing it anymore because I know I could get almost the same amount again because I want to sell my own honey, but it's having the markets to do so. You need to create a brand. You need to create labels. You need to keep pots. You've got to work out how you're going to do all that, and you've got to know your market you're going to go into. Basic marketing. You need an idea of who is around you, who is doing the same, and how far are they from you? Who are they selling to? Buying in honey, are you moving towards supplying many clients or just enough honey or just enough with the honey you have from your own hives? I personally love the romantic notion that you can say to clients, look, I've got honey for the next 6 months, but I'll be getting low in the spring and I'm not buying any and I'm only selling what I've got. That's what I like to do. But if you start supplying a supermarket, you have to really have another way of supplying that supermarket continuously because they want it on the shelves all the time. It's kind of falling into that trap, but do you, don't you? That's the dilemma. Apiaries, you need a lot of apiaries with good access at all times. You will not have much time for pleasantries. You can't go into an apiary really and have a chat to the owners because often apiaries are near the owners' houses. They all like to come out, but nowadays they know that I just like to wave because I say, if I'm in the apiary with hives open, do not come in because you will get stung. And that usually keeps them out. But the problem is you're not trying to be rude. You've just got a job to do. You're always on a schedule. You're always behind. You're always trying to catch up. So you want to get in, do the job and go on to the next apiary as quick as you can. That's what you have to do. Cash flow. You need to know your bank manager pretty well and know what your options are if it goes belly up. Have a realistic business plan with no BS. I'm not going to say what that means. You will know. Otherwise, reality will be your downfall. Do not kid yourself one bit. You cannot make money out of nothing. You have to do it properly. Realize beekeeping is a vocation, not a 9-to-5. It is serious business when you're a professional beekeeper. So where and how did I start? Well, we've got to start somewhere, right? Isn't that true? So the start of my activity, as I said, was in July 2009. And there's those 3 hives that I told you about that I had to move because my then wife got stung and there was a lot of bad words. And obviously I had to move the hives up pretty quick. But there they are. That's moved into my first apiary that I rapidly built just up the road from here. Those are the nukes you saw me making. And they are painted and ready to go. And I was even worried about the air getting in inside because I had frames. I even used to tape up the front. You can see that. That's what the red tape was. But obviously, I don't worry about that now. But you just think you know it all. So I think it's your bottom right. This is just catching my very first swarm, literally 500 meters from my house. I got a phone call from the lady. She said she got a lot of bees in a gable end wall. I went round and I thought, well, from what I've heard, I knew nothing about it at this stage. And from what I've heard, I thought, well, if the bees are coming and going, they've already made a nest. So I thought, well, I'll light the smoker up. And this was the easiest swarm catch you could ever have and the most spectacular because I smoked the hole in the wall and all the bees just poured out the top of the gable end. I mean, poured out. The whole swarm came out. And then I put the box on the floor where it is and they all went into the nuke box, which was just unbelievable. It was just, amazing. But that gave me the boost I needed to catch a swarm like that. Wow, what excitement. Surround yourself with the people that reflect who you want to be. Energies are contagious. So this was the guy who I mentioned before, Charles Basset. He was the guy I first met, and he was the local beekeeper. He's got the classic 2CV van, which is absolutely brilliant. And he lived in Kever. Sadly, he died about 5 years ago from old age. but he kind of left a bit of a legacy because he was the only main beekeeper. Everybody knew him there. And he used to, as I said, teach beekeeping, but he used to do a lot of what we call artificial swarming, where you'd have a hive and there's the nuke. You take the hive off its place, you move it forward a couple of meters, and then you put the nuke in its place. And from the mother hive, the donor hive, you put 2 frames of eggs, bees, and brood into the nuke box. And then you move the hive away so that all the flying bees come back to the nuke box, and they realize there's no queen in that, and they make a new queen in the process we all know. It's the most kind of the most simple way, but it works. These are all dark bees or black French AMM. Some were good, some were bad, some produced honey, some didn't. A right mix, but he was really good at doing what he did, and he got about 85% success rate from his operation he did. So it was really good. I learned a huge amount. When I look back now, the things he did for me, I'm like, blimey. I was so lucky to have met him when I did, because, you know, I was just accepted. I hardly spoke a word of French then. I'm not a lot better now, 20 years later, well, 10 years later, but I'm getting there. But it was just an amazing experience. And I think we should all make sure we keep in touch with the people who've been doing it for a long time, who are way older than us and maybe haven't got so many more years left, because they are the guys that know and have done it all before. They're a resource, if I could say that. So moving on a bit, I was lucky enough to write to Mike Palmer, who we all know is I won't say the godfather, but he is the kind of person who's taught us all about sustainable beekeeping and how the nucleus colony is the base of that. And I wrote to Mike in January 2014, 15, and he said, "Yep, come along, love to see you." So I booked my flights. I went there at a time I was just got divorced. I needed to bury my head in something. And Mike was just fantastic. He was so overwhelmingly welcoming. And if you look at that, I think the picture on the left, that's Mike harvesting that's the last queens of 2015. And that is one of his cell builders reassembled. And that's the cells obviously ready to be harvested there. So the story goes, basically I arrived the next morning, I'm sitting in Mike's Jeep, which is actually bright yellow. And I'm sitting there with these queen cells on my lap, and I say to Mike, "I'm living the dream, aren't I?" He said, "Yep, suck it up, buttercup." He said, "That's what it is. I'm sitting in Mike Palmer's, van with his queen cells on my lap, and I just can't believe this has happened." And from then, I just saw everything. It was an amazing week, and I wish it had been 2 weeks, to be honest, And this picture is Mike just taking a breather for a sec, but we are requeening in this apiary. We're actually trying to find a queen here that we can't find. Most of the time, we find a queen pretty quick, and then we put the new queen under a pushing cage. This basically planned replacement, we call it. So Mike likes to requeen in July, planned replacement of queens, and then he knows he's got production. They're ready to lay well the following spring, not swarm or be fits and starts like an old queen can be. That's what I want to work to, but I don't always have that at the moment because we don't have enough queens, we don't have enough time, but there's got to be a way of doing it. So the picture at the bottom shows this is one of his nucleus yards. And if you look, I hope you can see the boxes they are. They're basically what Mike calls his 5/5s. The very bottom box is still 5 frames, but it's divided into 2. And you have an entrance either side, the front and the back. And on top of that, you put supers, which are actually brood boxes. So this is how Mike builds his colonies up to then use them for either mating queens or for production colonies. And you notice the bear fence around here, electric fence to keep the bears out. They have that problem all the time. Not all of his apiaries, but most of them have bear fences around. Because it's the spring they have the problem where the bears come out of hibernation and it's cold and there's not much food around. If you've got an apiary that you haven't been to and the fence has gone down over the winter because of the snow, it's just a target to be ransacked by the bears, sorry. So the third person who influenced me hugely was Peter Little. He's a buckfast breeder in Cornwall, and absolutely smashing guy. It's a family business. He really was inspirational because he's completely out of my league. He's one of these breeders who has different colonies all over the place, and he knows where everything is. And he he was in touch with a lot of breeders in Europe. They swapped genetics, and he was also following the lines of Brother Adam, and he was in league with a lot of the breeders, as I say, from Europe who had those lines too. So they all worked together to breed better bees. And this was a great collaboration between him and other beekeepers. He also used the old mating station of Brother Adam at Sherborton, which I didn't get to visit, but obviously we all seen the pictures. It's another era, it's another bygone day, but it's just fantastic that I was able to meet someone. Sadly, Peter died this year, and he's taken with him a massive amount of information that we all wish he'd written down, because he was a walking encyclopedia. You would phone him up. I phoned him up several times after I came back from visiting his place. Said, you know, we did that. Tell me about that. And 2.5 hours later, 1 o'clock in the morning, you would still be talking to him. You say, I'm sorry, I've got to go. I just can't keep my eyes open. But he was just enthralling to speak to. So what he does here, they actually have a mobile saw that they go and cut their own larch and different types of timber in the forest nearby, and then he dries it in his own garden. And then they use that to make their frames, and everything is self-sourced. So they're almost completely sustainable in what they do. Fantastic operation. They have heather honey as the main crop in the summer, and they have the spring and the summer honey as well as selling queens. As I said, it's a family-run business. The sons do a lot of the work. And Peter was just really directing the last few years because he was becoming ill, unfortunately. This is one of their apiaries. You can see there's a lot of honey in some of those supers. And I visited several apiaries like this, and they were all like this. Absolutely fantastic setup. And he really knew his stuff. So this was how I used to increase my numbers of bees. When I was taught by Charles Basset, I showed you him before, the first beekeeper. He taught me how to make swarm traps, and I make nukes, boxes up, and I start to make nukes. You can see I've got 42 there, 35, 52. I actually ended up with, I think, 96 by the end of it before I stopped really putting swarm traps out, because all I did was make nukes every winter for the first 5 years, and I ended up with quite a few. And then I learned to do artificial swarming in my own stocks. So I was splitting my bees the same way he did as well. But then I learned how to do this. I learned how to make cell builders because of visiting Mike Palmer's. I learned how to raise brilliant queen cells, and I learned how to make nukes. And that was my entrance into more to better sustainability. So by doing this, I've got the genetics I want, and I've got the type of bee I want, and I've got the bee, and I've got a more of a guaranteed production of those things. I know when I can produce queen cells. I'm not waiting for swarms. I'm not stabbing in the dark thinking what will happen if, and I'm not waiting for the bees to make a queen. I've made them for the bees already. That's the key to it. So the benefits of raising your own queens. You can make splits from your production colonies twice a year. This is another form of swarm control, as I mentioned earlier. Give your queens extra room when they might otherwise swarm. Okay, so you go in, if you don't make an artificial swarm from your colonies, even if you've got the best genetics, I argue this all the time. I'm sure it's the climate here, but we sometimes have nothing, and then it's just overload on nectar. And even if you've got the bestest non-swarmy bees, they still go into swarm mode. So if you give them loads of room by making a split, you just leave the queen where it is, unless she's made queen cells already. If so, you take her away and put a new queen in the box. You've just left queenless, and you take the nuke away with the queen in it. But if she hasn't swarmed and you think there's still a lot of flow to go, you can take a nuke from that strong colony, and they will refill all those frames with brood in the time before the summer flow. So it's a way of swarm control. It helps you, and it gives you nukes. So you've got extra bees as well you're creating. If you don't do it, you lose bees. They're in the trees. It's part of the yearly cycle. You know that you've got to do that. It's just something that we work to do. So we should do. One colony can usually give you 2 splits and 2 honey crops, but it's not always like that. There's often issues, but that's what we like to work to. We know that is possible in most years. So as a professional, you have plenty of resources at your disposal to raise the best queens. And if you know about queen rearing, you know that it's all about the raw jelly. See that cell there? absolutely full to the hilt of royal jelly on the day that the queen was about to hatch. This will be day 10 or 11 from grafting, so day 15, 16 before she starts to hatch on day 16. And we put in that cell in a cell protector because we might have made up nukes from colonies that had less than ideal bees, but it still works. So we just don't want them to tear down that cell before she hatches. Usually when the queens hatch as virgins, they're usually accepted anyway. So we're putting a virgin queen that's about to hatch into a nuke box here probably. And if you look behind, we've got a portable incubator that just helps keep the temperature a bit higher while we're transferring the cells. But the cells are transferred at the last minute, and that's all planned. And that's why you can do that if you've got a portable incubator, so you don't put the queens under any cold temperatures. And raising your own queen speeds up the production time. You don't have to wait for them to make a queen. You do it with the genetics you want, as I said. So you make your split. Personally, and a lot of people do this, we make our splits 7 days before. We go in and cut out the queen cells. And as soon as we cut out the queen cells, we introduce a ripe queen cell of the genetics we want. So the bees know that the only thing they can do is accept the queen that's in that cell. She is born and off she goes and mates pretty quick. So apiaries, you need lots of them. You need an awful lot of them, and they must be accessible all year round. In other words, you should be able to get into them. I'm not saying you can drive a vehicle into them, but you can get to them all year round. You must be able to come and go as you please. As I said before, you can't really spend time when you get to every apiary yapping to somebody because you want to just get on. Be very selective when you're looking for an apiary. You need to get your vehicle right next to your hives between April and October. And this is crucial. It's no good a mate saying, oh, I know somewhere, and then showing you this place and you're like, well, don't know. You've got to be absolutely sure it's the right place, because once you've got set up, it's a heck of a job to move at the wrong time of year. You don't, as I said before, you don't have time to stop and shut. You want to be in and out. Excuse me for repeating that, but it's so important. Selected sheltered sites with the sunny aspects are difficult to find. You will soon discover this, okay? They are like hen's teeth, pretty rare, all right? Invest in good hive supports. It will save you time and money in the long run. So what we do, if you look here, you can see it there. We've got 2 tires under each pallet. This is, if you had a standard Euro pallet, we actually make our own now, though, that are even better because they're from wood we buy, just the right size and shape and everything. But this is a pallet cut down. You cut it into you cut a third off of it, and you leave the other 2/3 in one shape of the pallet, and that then sits on 2 tires perfectly. So the benefits of this are: you have a stable base for 2 hives. The ground that the tire is on is wet the majority of the time in the winter, and the tire keeps the moisture away from the pallet, so the pallet doesn't rot. If you've ever put pallets on the ground, you know how quickly they rot. The tire also does another thing. It helps reduce vibrations on the floor to the beehive, so the bees have a better time. They're not, if you're walking around or doing cutting or something, you get less angry bees because they don't sense so much. It's not much, but it helps. And the tires actually mold well into the shape of the ground, so they're good at self-leveling. That's why we use tires, and they're free. So it's a really good thing. Hive supports will last you a long 5 years in one apiary if you set them up right. Obviously, we reuse the tires year and year, but we don't, obviously, we can't stop the pallets from rotting. We looked at dipping them, we looked at treating them, but it's really not worth doing all that. So on to a little bit about honey extraction. This is a picture of the honey extraction unit. I've got the workshop. I didn't explain before, but my colleague owns it. I just rent it a little bit and do work with him and help him maintain it. And I'm lucky, very lucky to have this, because it means I can come and extract quickly. The whole beauty, the whole thing of explaining this is that a honey extraction unit doesn't have to be flash. It's just there to extract honey twice a year. If you have more nectar flows, say you are in the center of France and you do your spring honey, then you might do some acacia, then you might do some lime tree honey, then you might do some summer honey, then you might do some sunflower honey. if you do all those kind of things, you maybe need a bigger extraction room because you are going to be spending more time in it. But this is very simple. And it's simple because it's not practical and it's just your time. There's no point in renewing your equipment if it works absolutely fine. You are, as I said here, you're only using it twice a year. So I'll explain what it does. We bring the honey in on this. Well, let me start off. These supers here, just beneath that window, are on rollers on pallets. They're on a pallet with trolley wheels. Okay, so we wheel the honey in. This is actually finished been extracting, so it's stacked to be removed. So that's been extracted, but we'd wheel it around here to the left-hand side of the picture where you see there's a decapping table there. It's a bit laborious, it takes time, but it's, as I said before, it's nothing flash, but it's a way of extracting honey. We unbox the super on here, and then the frames taken out individually go through the decapper. This machine is a vertical decapper, and all the dross falls down into this. This is a honey spinner, and out from that wax that's separated comes the honey into this bucket, and you actually extract a lot of honey, and you have nice dry cappings ready to melt down straight away. The frame continues through, you take it off this side and into either extractor. From there, the honey, once the extractors have worked, comes out into this sump. There's a sump, has a series of baffles, and the honey with gravity progresses through here. And when it arrives at the other end, it's fairly wax-free, and then it's pumped into the barrel just by a simple float switch, which is just there. But that's all you need. And then with this barrel has the honey in, and you can skim off the wax 2 or 3 days after, and it comes off completely clean because all the wax flows to the surface. The whole point of this is just to say, if it works and you're only using it twice a year, it doesn't have to be flash, okay? But it's a good operation for what we both use. We both got about 200 hives, so it works well. Another thing you need is equipment, and you need lots of it. You've got to be prepared to have everything you need. You can't have 200 hives without all the equipment to go with it. And this is when I bought my last 100 hives 2 years ago now. I'm going through the process of painting them. I bought them in bulk from a supplier. I didn't make them myself because you get to the point where you know it's actually too time consuming. Where we are in Brittany and all over the world now actually, but wood has become very expensive. I went to a supplier that makes just hives. It's a huge factory, and there's one in France now that supplies most of the big shops. And I bought 100 hives direct. I was also able to claim back from a government subsidy that if I bought the hives as a bulk and I bought a feeder with them and a base, I was able to get 40% back of the cost, and I was able to reinvest that in profit. So you can see here, I put these hives on 2 pieces of wood just to keep them off the ground, and then I'm putting inside all the metal work. We use calculations here. I'm putting on the handles, and they've had their final paint. You can see here I've been painting them on top of some barrels. You just use what you have, but I had to get all these hives painted and ready because I had all the nukes ready. All the bees that went in these hives I made. I didn't sell anything, so I've had to really work hard to I had to have money to buy these hives at all costs. And the Dadant 5-frame nukes that I've made before, and I can see there's a lot, end up with a lot of nukes. Most of these went out every year as swarm traps. You can actually see I've written in on chalk, I don't know if you can see that, it says RTG, and that was what I used to put ready to go. So in other words, I got a swarm trap in there with 2 old frames and 3 frames of foundation, and it's all clean. The comb is clean, there's no pollen in it, it's been checked, it's ready. So when I'm in the spring ready to go, I just would grab 10 swarm traps and go and put them out all these different locations I have. But that in itself is a lot of work because you've got to go and check them, and you've got to get swarms down off high walls late at night because bees don't stop flying till late at night in the summer. But when you make your own nukes, you don't have to do any of that anymore, and you get a better product in a timely fashion. But you need resources, you need to have the Nukes. So I bought 100 of these. These are Dayton 6-frame hives. And why are they 6-frame when I was always using 5? Because you realize suddenly that when you have 5 frames Nukes, that in the spring they are unmanageable. If you have a 6-frame hive in the spring, you can at least hold it over. You've got that extra frame to do something with. The bees can build on it, they can build brood onto it. It just seems that most colonies need a minimum of 6 at the very earliest. If you don't transfer them into a main hive in the spring by the end of April, they're going to swarm anyway because they're just so choked in most years. But what I'm getting at is by moving to 6 frames, you have more Nukes, but you have the right Nukes, and that's what's important. You see here, my colleague helped me make, well, he got it all organized to me. He helped me make these wooden eeks, and these wooden eeks fit exactly on top of the hives, and then the roof clicks on afterwards, and you can put a feeder in that right on top of the bees, and then the feeder, this area is sealed, so the bees warm up the syrup, and then they take the syrup down. It's a really good little tip, because if you buy Nukes with ready-made feeders that are polystyrene, often the syrup is insulated above the bees, and they don't take it down because the syrup goes cold. So, honey supers, you need a minimum of 2 per hive. And if you work on that, you might just have enough, because you always get some hives that don't need a super because they swarm or something happens to them or whatever, they get queenless. You know, if you do that, you have it, but you need 2 per hive as a minimum. So I've got 200 production colonies, that's 400 supers before you even start. The material you need is massive. And this is me making roofs. I was told to make deep roofs, and boy, am I glad I did, because if you have a deep roof, it accommodates insulation, and you can put a feeder on top. So you can put your feeder on top if you're using a feeder and put your insulation on top, but come the winter, you can reverse it. But it means the feeder is kept with the colony, so it stays with the colony all the time. So there's no chance of kind of cross-contamination with, if it did get something on it, some brood disease or something, it stays one with that colony, but it's protected and kept dry. So you can, and also because you've got deep roofs, they don't blow off in the winter. We don't generally use straps and stuff here. If we get an area that's quite windy, we generally put rocks on top of the hive. That's what we do. So Mini Plus, the mating Nukes, we buy them in kit. You can see they're made in 4 pieces. You paint them all together. And then when you give them all a bit of coat of paint, you push them together and they dry. And then you just give them a final, so you give them 2 coats. The final coat just seals the outside, but it's the paint that glues them all together. And that's the secret to it. And my colleague Christian on the workshop taught me how to make these bases for the hives. They're out of cementing ply, but basically it's indestructible. And we wax dip these in a small wax dipping machine, well, a small wax cauldron, and it seals them forever. So those Mini Plus sit on top of these bases, and that's the entrance there. If you can see me with my cursor, that's where the bees come and go from. But the problem with Mini Plus is, well, I can't say a problem because we don't use them, but they come with a base if you buy the base, and they come with the roof. And we just find the roofs aren't very good and the bases aren't very good. But that's just our opinion. That's what I've been taught, and it's what seems to be correct, just because I've learned from other people who've told me that. So syrup, you'll need to feed your bees, and you will need to feed them. You can't think, maybe I won't need to feed them. We've had a good summer flow, because sometimes the summer flow like this year was rubbish, you know, and you've got to get hold of bulk delivery. So this is syrup that is Fructo Plus. It's a fructose syrup, comes from a factory in Belgium. They render down grains and cereals, and some years it's a little bit more expensive, some years it isn't. But the interesting thing is, one of these IBCs, or totes they're known as, it holds 600 litres, but it weighs 900 kilos. So it's a huge amount of weight, and that's how heavy the syrup is. But it's not expensive. For us, I bought 5 this year, and my approximate bill was about 1,400 euros for 5 of these full. So that's 3,000 litres, so it's about 1,500 euros. So you can work it out. It's really cheap, and it's the best way. The trouble is, you have to turn up. This isn't our apiary. This is another beekeeper's place in Normandy. We drive up to Normandy for the day. And this is my colleague Christian, who had a big truck before, and we could do it all in one fell swoop, but he's now sold the truck because he's decreasing. And we could put 6 or 7 in here. As you imagine, it's quite a lot of weight. And you know, it's an HGV truck. It took that truck up to the limit. So what we have to do now is we have to take 2 at a time and bring it back. But it's still way more economical to do that for us than it is to you know, do anything else like buy sugar and mix it by hand, because we can't get the sugar, but we can get the liquid syrup. And what happens is there'd be 5, 6 other beekeepers who share this delivery. So they all fill their containers, and the guy who owns this, owns the apiaries, he then fills up everything. He always uses a huge amount. Sometimes he gets 2 deliveries a year because he's got staff and everything. So he has a lot, but it helps us a lot. So that's the kind of thing. These are the buckets we use to go into the apiaries. They're 20-kilo buckets, and we generally don't fill them full as a rule, but it works for us. That's how we get our syrup to the bees and tip that into feeders. You need to be able to treat your varroa with something. I use I sublimate oxalic acid. This year I've caged all my queens in the summer because I felt it was the right thing to do, and it seems to have paid off. So I did my splits, and at the same time I found the queen and I caged the queen in that colony. I removed some of the brood by making a split, and then the colony was broodless for well, had no queen laying, I should say, for the 21 days. And on day 21 I released the queen, and then I went and vaped all my colonies. It's a lot of work, but we had calm weather, and I basically got a huge hit on the varroa because there's no brood. All the mites are phoretic. So I was going around furiously vaping, but I bought a machine. I've had it for 4 years now. It's a Sublimox. I used to use a Varox vaporizer, which you might be familiar with, but I couldn't use that with the amount of hives I got. You just don't have the time, it takes too long. With the Sublimox, you can treat a whole apiary in under an hour and go. So you can see, but the problem is the reality of caging queens was, just very briefly, that in every apiary, I couldn't always find every single queen because you're on the time scale and you think, oh, I just got to you've tore the colony apart, but you can't find her. You come back and she's still laying somewhere. So you just have to treat that colony 3 times over with 6-day intervals. So the sublimation still works, but I did do more sublimation than I needed, but I knew it would work, and it did pay off. So when you have colonies of brood, you've got to sublimate more, but it works. I've got all the gear. I've got a great mask. I've got an inverter for my truck. These machines run off 240 volts, and it's endless. You've just got an extension lead, and off you go. You can get the truck right in the summer. And oxalic acid, obviously, I use Apibiox, so I have to say that. It works really well and it's a great treatment. So now I've got very low mite levels, or so it seems. But we'll see how the winter goes. There you go. You need a machine that's capable of quickly treating lots of colonies, Sublimox, for example. You need a reliable brush clearing machine. This is something that people overlook. When you have apiaries, you've got to maintain them, and weeds grow, brambles grow. If you don't maintain your apiaries, they become a death trap. Okay, I've tried harvesting honey in the summer. You're lifting off boxes, you're walking through the apiary, and you're tripping up, because as brambles grow, they go out the ground and they go back down in again, and then they root, and it's the perfect loop to get your foot caught in. And this is what I get where we are in France, and it's literally, as I said, a death trap. I've fallen over several times, but if you keep your apiaries cut, you can. It's very efficient. Okay, it keeps I like to think it also keeps. It keeps everything tidy, but it keeps the grass short, but it dries quickly. You don't get everything wet all the time. You know, it doesn't hold moisture so much, and you just need to do that. It's part of your maintenance of doing your bees. It's just like, right, I've got to go. I've done the honey. I've got the supers. Oh, I've got to go grass cut again. Right, the apiary's in a mess. Right, let's get that cut again. And it's never ending. This year was unbelievable. It just kept going and growing and growing. And remember, you're on your own. No one's going to tell you what to do. It's only up to you to work it out. You can't afford to take risks. You use standard practices you know will work. As I said, it's the numbers game that will pay off in most years. You need to build up a reserve. You need to sell your current year's honey the following year. And that gives you the security of having a year in lieu. But I haven't built the reserve up. The year I was hoping to start building reserve was the year I needed the reserve. You've got to be open-minded and dynamic. You've got to take the opportunities when they're there. And it may be the only one of that season. So if you had a honey year like we had this year, you make more nukes, for example. You need to risk assess everything that you do, because you might not see it, but you've got to be careful. If you break your leg mid-season, you're absolutely up that creek with the broken paddle. And no one's going to help you out. So you need to join a professional beekeepers group. Like the bee farmers in the UK, we have one over here called ADA Britann, and you'll benefit from exchanges with like-minded professionals, and you've got better chance of finding good deals on equipment through the group. There may be European Union grants, like I've just said about when I first bought my hives, and there's other ones available for me if I so wish to expand. It's just a question of finding them and knowing how to apply for them, and that's what these groups do. You'll get better insurance cover, and it's the most important thing. You can't be paying huge bills when your outlay is small at the start. Buy bee books, okay? Some of them ones you might recognize there. I got this lot off a lady whose husband died, who was a beekeeper, and this was in France. And they're all English books. I couldn't believe it. And I got this lot, I think, for 20 euros, but I gave her more because I felt really sorry for her. But there's some great books there. But I've got other ones as well, but it just shows you what you can pick up sometimes. You never can have too many. You can share books with other people. They're a great source over the winter if you get time to read. Always leave the door open. You never know what's around the corner. This is what I used to do. This is what I could go back to. But I hope you enjoyed this presentation. It just gives you an idea of what I do. And there we go.
Wow. Well done, Richard. That was fantastic. That was fantastic. A very comprehensive tour of your life as a beekeeper. And if that doesn't give inspiration to people, I don't know what will, because you went from the beginning all the way through, and it's really inspirational.
Thank you. Yeah, I really think it's important to most important thing is to reach out and look who's around you, and you've got to look at where you want to travel to. And I did, but I just found myself so lucky that I had the opportunity, because I took it and it was fantastic. It was just I think things happened at the right time. But thank you very much. Thank you.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So there's nothing left for me to say, only on behalf of Three Rivers Beekeepers Association here in Donegal and County Tyrone, up in the northern part of Ireland, I want to thank you very, very much, Richard, for that fantastic talk. Very, very inspirational, I must say, and it's a credit to you. For anybody who's interested in knowing any more, and I'm not just plugging Richard here, but I was following Richard on YouTube for the past couple of years, and I didn't even realize who it was until a couple of weeks ago. But if you're interested in knowing more about Richard and what he does, he has fantastic videos on YouTube that he updates regularly. So you can go on and subscribe to his channel there, and you'll get videos quite regularly that'll pass the winter months for you and inspire you, hopefully, for 2022. So that's everything. Thank you very much, everyone. And look after yourselves, and good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Colin.
Nice to speak to you.
And thanks to everybody else. It was a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.